we're going to talk a little bit, have a chat about him and the technology that he works with. So, greetings. Shall I just start with my prepared questions and we can see how we go and what unfolds, Bernard?
Sure, yes. It's a big honor for me to be in this interview. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do, what our visions are, and how we try to make a little difference in this world.
So maybe tell us a bit what drew you to the field and what's made you stay in the field of designing technology for neuromodulation.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I'm an engineer, electronics engineer. I studied in southern Germany, in Munich actually, but that's a long time ago. In my first life, I was actually involved in building super high-speed laser communication systems for satellites. Later, I spent a couple of years in investment banking, in trend analysis and analysis of high technology companies. And then I came across neurofeedback. Actually, I was always wondering about people who had obvious problems, but I never knew exactly what's going on there, right? So I ran into people who had trouble in life, simply with basic stuff. And I was always, that's how we engineers think. We say, if we could just do something here. With technology, of course, because we're all technology freaks, right? But the occasion to get involved with neurofeedback was actually our son. That was 20 years ago, when he was seen as highly intelligent, but probably ADHD, focus problems, whatever. And we were recommended to look at neurofeedback. That was interesting for me. I said, oh, cool, technology that involves the brain and signal processing, which is one of my special focus areas. So I started looking around. What is that? Who is who? And in fact, here in Switzerland, there are already a couple of companies and practices offering neurofeedback, but most of them were too far away from us. So I thought, well, maybe something interesting to look into anyway. So I did some industry research, as we did back then at the investment bank, to see who is who. And I figured there were already many companies out there doing neurofeedback. And there was one particular company, with the name of which was mentioned again and again, and the group behind it. And it was Siegfried and Susan Othmer and Sieber and Fischer and all these people who started early in the 80s, developing obviously the best technologies. So I did a course with Siegfried Othmer. It was in 2004. And I thought, well, if only 10% of what he tells there holds true, I would actually like to be involved. And what do we engineers do if we don't believe something? Well, we try it out. So I did. My first guinea pig was my wife, who had headaches since I knew her, and nothing helped. And neurofeedback did. I thought, whoops. And the second guinea pig was, of course, our son. And it was like a remote control, right? When you changed the reward frequency and you could decide about the mood and whatever. And then the principal of the school gave us a call and said, hey, what did you do with your son this week? And then I thought, okay, there is something going on here. So I wanted to be involved, and eventually I got involved. And the first thing for me that was important was to say, this needs to be established in the medical field. So we were the first company, and it was started as a garage company, by the way. It was just myself. Well, actually, we didn't even have a garage, so it started in the basement. But it was very clear that stuff needs to have all applicable medical approvals. So meanwhile, looking back, you said what made me stay in the field. This is exciting stuff. I think with this technology, we can really make a difference. Meanwhile, we have about 40 people and trained approximately 6,000 people. And we estimate that about 50 to 100,000 patients finish a treatment that involves our neurofeedback in a year. So yeah, what more does an engineer want, right?
what specific things would you want people to know about your particular products?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's for professionals only. And when I got involved, people were saying, oh, neurofeedback is the new panacea that will solve all the problems of the world. We don't think that way. In our view, neurofeedback is a tool. It's a tool for professionals. It's like the drill for the dentist. It doesn't do the job by itself. But it's a tool when mastered by a professional, then it will be quite effective. And that was my personal goal all along. The patient, so the product and the clinician need to be so good that the patient is enthusiastic about the experience and looks forward to the next session. And I think meanwhile, we managed that quite well. So first of all, when we look at our neurofeedback products, and we have other stuff too. So we also are involved in diagnostics, biomarker diagnostics, and research tools. But the main stuff that we do is therapeutics. So that means neurofeedback. So first and foremost, the tools need to be super highly effective. So if you were to make scalpels for surgeons, my goal would be that they are the sharpest and the most precise ones. Second, it's important that the technology is easy to use. These are mental health professionals and not technology geeks. So it's our job to hide all the complexity behind a front end that is easy, intuitive to use. And second and third, it's important that the patients love it. So we put a lot of energy into gamification, which means that there are very nice feedback animations, but also games, real games, even in virtual reality, 3D games, and video players and all of this.
You know, a lot of what you're going to be, you're saying here is going to be directed towards clinicians. If you have maybe a specific story that comes to mind of a clinician's talking to you about using your technology, what they were using it for. I mean, you must have many of these stories, but what they were using it for and how it worked for them.
Yeah, there are many stories, right? So I estimate well, it's still small, the field, right? So I estimate our number of clinicians who use the system about 5,000, right? Well, one, for instance, is a child psychiatrist here in Switzerland. He works as a psychotherapist and he uses neurofeedback, but he does not do only neurofeedback. He does what he does, right? All his therapeutic approaches, and he uses neurofeedback. So focus for him is, of course, ADHD. That's still the most application, autism, but also, of course, trauma with young people. And he tells me that neurofeedback makes a huge difference for him. First of all, he says the patients love to come. They love the neurofeedback as part of the whole therapeutic approach. Of course, he is a very good clinician, right? But he says sometimes people are in the practice in the waiting room already an hour early, simply because they can't wait until they finally start. Then he says the no-show rate dropped from about 30% to almost zero. In other words, people like to come. And he says, you know, my revenue is about 30% higher, mainly because of that. Then he says, I'm a happier person because, first of all, I see my clients are happy. They are doing better, much faster. And that's a very personal thing. He says, for the 30 minutes of the neurofeedback or 20 minutes, I can lean back a little bit. Now, the approaches that we favor do actively involve the clinician. As I said, it's a tool, but it's a difference. So he can lean back a little bit from this intense one-on-one relationship for 20 minutes, take notes, ask questions, and all of this, which means that he says, I'm more relaxed in the evening, I'm happier because the stuff works, and I'm making more money. So that's basically the central story, which is important for clinicians, I think, because at the moment, I think there is no clinician on this planet who doesn't have a waiting list. So neurofeedback could actually help to reduce that waiting list. When we talk about traumatized people, we have almost all of them who I know say, this is a game changer for my practice. Or they say, I have no idea how I would deal with these patients without neurofeedback. So this is all actually the fuel that drives us to keep investing in this.
The theme of this conference is neurofeedback for trauma and in uncertain times. So would you have anything more you would add to that? Maybe, as you said, you know, there's a huge need for help out there, and how you see this technology.
Yeah, but first and foremost, I think it's important to say, what does neurofeedback do? So I think consensus today in science is it improves self-regulation. In other words, it helps the brain to learn to adjust all the arousal levels of all the networks in a way that it functions in an optimum way for a given task. Therefore, I think neurofeedback fits into many applications in mental health, almost all probably. So I figured that neurofeedback should be used in any clinic, any practice that deals with mental health.
Have you got any examples that you could tell us about where you've seen neurofeedback being used more? You know, you've spoken about the psychiatrist. In situations where the work is being done with very disenfranchised type of people, you know, our refugees or our traumatized children, or, you know, those sorts of groups?
Yes. Projects. We support, for instance, the American Trauma Research Foundation. There is a project that aims to support agencies that serve the underserved. We support the Australian STARTS program. So actually, I think these are perfect places where neurofeedback can be and shall be applied. Usually, that's probably too early to say, but usually these agencies get budgets to deal with these underserved people, right? Mm-hmm. Could be children. Most times they are traumatized. They need, actually, they profit a lot from neurofeedback. So what we do in a couple, or what we try to do, we support a couple of pilot projects where we want to see how does neurofeedback make a difference for those agencies. And the results are actually quite promising, what we see there. So the statistics is still low. It's still only a couple of thousand people who we have statistics from. But it seems that neurofeedback makes a huge difference in such agencies. First of all, for the young people there. The symptoms of them get better rather quickly. And then for the agencies themselves, it makes a huge difference, because patients, what I said just before with the psychiatrist, it's the same there. The no-show rates drop significantly from about 40% to below 5%, which means the agencies can do their job much better. Then clinicians love it, so the attrition rate goes down. And so on a broad level, it seems that neurofeedback is a win-win situation for those agencies. In some countries, we are gathering experience how this is paid and covered by the health insurances or the governments, whoever is in there. In some cases, it's simply implicitly there, like in prisons. So we support a couple of projects where neurofeedback is used in prisons. Yeah, did this answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. It would be interesting for people to hear. Can you give a bit of an idea how many countries your equipment's being used in?
Yeah, it's about, well, almost all countries. You know what? I have a slide here. This is a map of Europe. Let's start with Europe really quickly, because sometimes people think, oh, you know, neurofeedback, this is new, that's the latest fad, nobody uses it. And that's simply not the case. So here we see the year 2017. see if I can put my mouse pointer over. Yeah, the year 2017, you see Europe, and each of these little dots is a clinic or hospital or practice that uses our technology. What you see here in Central Europe and in Southern Europe here, not sure if you can see my mouse pointer, but anyway, where the two violet darts go into, you see a larger number of people doing neurofeedback. And that's because of the fact that there's reimbursement already since a long time. So like in Germany, for instance, the OTs are allowed to use neurofeedback since 10 years. And it needs to be said, in Germany, the OTs play a super important role in the whole service chain of mental health, including trauma.
When you say OTs, meaning occupational therapists?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's different from country to country, right? So in each country where we work, we try to figure out how does the service chain of mental health work, and where would neurofeedback be applied in the best possible way. But now let's simply look. This is the year 2017. Oh, it needs to be also said that since 2018, neurofeedback is recommended in the guidelines for psychiatrists in Germany. So I just wanted to say, when we speak about neurofeedback, this trend is intact. When I got involved 20 years ago, neurofeedback was not really accepted in the medical field. And that changed dramatically. It is still early stages, but it's getting there. So I think that trend is actually intact. But now let's go through the years. So you see how there are more and more people using neurofeedback. The latest news is that we have a reimbursement number for, or not reimbursement number, but a reimbursement way for biofeedback in Switzerland. And then, and this is the worldwide map. So you see it's quite widespread, not so much in, in your areas, but we are about to change that. But yeah, you get an impression that neurofeedback is already quite established and widely used.
Inspiring to see that.
Yeah, it's
yeah. Are you aware of areas where your technology is being combined with other types of neuromodulation technology?
Well, I think that's our basic model. We say, again, neurofeedback is a tool. It's not a replacement for therapy. It's not a replacement for other tools. There is medication. There is cognitive behavioral therapy. There is transcranial magnetic stimulation. There is TDCS. Many different things that are being done nowadays to help people with mental health issues. Or there is EMDR in trauma. And so what we see is that the combination is the thing. It's like in a car workshop, right? There is not just one tool, there are many tools. And it's the job of the professional to select the right tool and the right tools and the right combination of all the tools. So in most cases, and it's probably how we approach the market. First and foremost, we only address professionals. And second, we teach neurofeedback as tool, not as the panacea, right? So all these professionals use it in combinations like EMDR and neurofeedback and.
I'll ask you just what your vision is for the future of the products.
Well, first and foremost, I think there is still a lot of studies to be done. Right? So recently there are more and more publications about neurofeedback and trauma, and we actually support and fund a couple of studies as well. And for that, we mostly don't use our clinical systems. We use our research systems. One important thing for me is that we support researchers with the foundational stuff, right? So that they have the entire signal chain sort of taken care of so that they can focus on their research topic. So as a couple of examples, there is a study going on in Italy at the moment, also with biomarkers. There is studies going on in Canada, or also here in Switzerland. So we try to offer cooperation with these scientists. So we have an own medical science team. It's about 4 people who manage all of those things. Because I think we need to understand more what's going on in the brain. There are various models how neurofeedback impacts the brain. We actually support various therapeutic approaches for applying neurofeedback in that field. So I think we are still in the early stages. What my vision is, very simple. I think these tools need to be used in every clinical practice that works with mental health issues. And for me personally, frankly, trauma is probably the top priority. I feel that a traumatized person doesn't have a chance in life. This in particular applies to children. So we, for instance, support a couple of projects about foster care children. I feel without intervention, they don't have chances in lives. And I think that neurofeedback helps to give them a chance. And that means a lot to me personally.
It changes the trajectory, doesn't it? To get the earlier you start, the more that you can set a completely different trajectory of.
Yes, and from our pilot projects, we get quite some good evidence for that. So that's actually the fuel that drives us.
Thank you. Thank you. Would there be anything else that you'd like to speak to, Bernard, that we haven't spoken to so far in our talk?
Well, maybe I could quickly cover the topic of diagnostics. Since the early days of neurofeedback, there is this notion that we can measure from the EEG what's going on in the brain. And we probably can make some statements, but this is very early stage. We are also involved in biomarker research. So our goal is here to find reliable, high quality biomarkers that help us to figure out how does a brain process information. So we talk about brain function analysis. How does a brain process information? We compare that to a healthy subject of the same age group, and then can draw conclusions for recommendations for everyday life, and for the therapeutic intervention. So that's also a technology that we are heavily involved in, which is, in my view, not yet really related to neurofeedback, because it's still premature, but it's also getting there.
Can you say, maybe without getting too technical, I guess, a little bit more about what that technology is, and maybe even explain a little bit more about the biomarkers for people who maybe are, don't quite know what's meant by that?
Yeah. So, you have a patient here. What is the problem with the patient? That's the big question, right? So even if there is diagnosis, say for ADHD, that still doesn't tell how to treat that patient. Now, it would be very nice if we could figure out what actually is going on in that brain and what is causing those symptoms that we observe. Say there is a child with attention deficit disorder. This is still the biggest application for neurofeedback today for a number of reasons. So it's easy to diagnose. Well, it's not that easy to diagnose, but it can be diagnosed. What's the typical treatment? Well, we give some medication. However, there are a couple of patients who do not react to that medication, and it would be great to know beforehand. For instance, and we have, for instance, biomarkers for that. So that tell you with quite a high sensitivity and specificity if that patient is a responder or a non-responder. So that would be a very simple example. And such a biomarker is actually a combination of various measurements that we take. So actually, first, what we do is we give tasks to the person. So the person needs to do a simple task, compare pictures and press a button for like half an hour. And after that, we can see how the brain processes information. We then compare that to a healthy subject of the same age group and can draw conclusions. So the other idea would be to get more information about trauma, because there are various types of trauma. So it would be great if we could have a window to the brain that tells us a little bit more how to, in an optimum way, start the treatment. But this is all very early stage. I actually personally think with regard to those technologies, we just scratched the surface of what's going to be possible. Today's neurofeedback systems are already quite complex, and it's not trivial. But I think that the big papers are yet to be written, and the big technology advances are still in front of us. So, and that's exciting. We try to be involved in this and invest every single minute of our lives and every penny that we make in this.
That's fantastic. And I think as clinicians, which I'm one too, we have to work with what's available at the moment.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think what we have available at the moment is already there. It's quite mature already. So I was heavily involved in development also of best practices, right? So everything that we recommend in training courses has been tried out at thousands of patients, right? So the stuff that we teach works. And speaking of that, by the way, we as a company do only sell equipment if somebody cares to take an introduction class that we kind of certify, right? That we think enables people to really work with this technology. And second, it's limited to professionals only. That's important. It sounds simple, but it's not. You know, when I got started and still today, there are systems offered to lay people, to parents, to treat their own children and all of this. But as it's our goal to make these tools as effective as they can be, they need to be handled by professionals, and the professionals need to get a proper education and training program. So, and in those training programs, what we do is we tell people best practices. So here's your patient. How do you assess that patient? How do you figure out what neurofeedback protocol to apply? And then do it in a way, as I said in the beginning, that the patient is enthusiastic about the experience and looks forward to the next session. And meanwhile, the neurofeedback, modern neurofeedback has become so effective that patients feel an effect rather quickly. So our clinicians tell us, and people who we know, also our lecturers, they tell us, if I don't see profound changes in symptoms within a couple of sessions, I'm getting very nervous. In other words, that's already the expectation for neurofeedback.